In the last blue of a December afternoon, Heathrow's apron lights blinked on and threw long reflections across wet tarmac. Pan Am Flight 103, clipper made of the seas, stood at the gate, a familiar giant bound for New York. Baggage carts clattered, families sorted coats and passports. In the cabin, a flight attendant helped a child stow a backpack, then checked ovens and doors. The route was routine, north over Scotland, then west into a winter night. Lockerbie, a town of stone and lighted shop windows, settled toward evening. Shutters slid down, the post van rattled past the green, and a terrier worried a stick in a back garden. A television quiz show ran too loud in one house. In another, a kettle clicked off. The air promised frost. No one on those streets could have named the airplane punching toward them at 31,000 feet, or imagined the way sky could fail. At 7:03 p.m., radar showed the target split and vanish. Pilots nearby saw a brief white and orange flower, then darkness. On the ground, the sound came in pieces. A slam like a door, a tearing like canvas, a second-long roll that made mugs twitch on shelves. A farmer stepped outside and thought lightning without a storm. A police constable, already shrugging on his jacket, looked up into nothing and began to run. On the frequency, calm voices turned clipped. "Scottish, 103 is lost radar," a controller said to the room, then keyed another line. "Diverts, fuel states, weather at Prestwick." Pilots offered positions and eyes. One crew reported lights falling like a slow meteor shower, another a fire on the ground. A major incident plan cracked open. Ambulances from 3 counties, ward doors propped, the phone tree that wakes a town in rings. The sky began to fall. Paper drifted like snow. Seat cushions and clothing landed in hedges. A suitcase burst in a lane and released a small rain of postcards. Far worse followed. A section of fuselage scythed into Sherwood Crescent and turned houses to a crater of flame and brick. 11 residents died in a breath. Across fields, other pieces thudded into earth and left holes neatly rimmed with frost turned to mud. Chaos arrived with quick courage. Fire crews nosed engines toward heat that beat the windscreen like a hand. Neighbors grabbed blankets, kettles, lists. A doctor laced boots and trotted into smoke. In a church hall, tables became desks. Names here, addresses there. In the streets, officers' torches found aluminum and wiring laid against hedgerows like a stripped machine. The night learned new words: debris field, recorder, forward section. Morning held its breath. Steam lifted from black earth and drifted over a line of houses that were now edges. The crater at Sherwood Crescent looked impossible, a bowl cut from a street that had repeated itself for 50 years. Searchlines formed, bright vests moving like a slow river. Reporters framed grief, clergy framed prayers. The town realized that the dead were not only its own, but also travelers from far cities and other winters. While the town buried shock in work, investigation began. Flags marked fields in colors that meant something to engineers. Trucks carried wreckage to a hangar where a fuselage would be stitched back together with wire and patience. In a lab, scorched cloth and plastic yielded traces: chemical fingerprints, serial numbers, the pattern of a blast that had started in a piece of luggage inside a hard case, inside a radio cassette player. Words from the inquiry arrived dry and precise. An explosive device, a cargo container in the forward hold, structural failure in less than a second. But people learned them by touch. A volunteer traced jagged edges with gloves and said softly, "Here is the door, here is the frame." A constable found a passport open to a page that still held an arrival stamp and closed it as if to keep the wind from reading. Families came from airports and snowbound highways to a town none had heard of before the news. They walked fences and tucked flowers into wire. They stood beside a field where frost glittered and said names into air that had been full of paper and fire. Volunteers brewed tea until the urns went dry. Someone drove to Carlisle for more. In spare rooms and the school gym, people slept and woke without their old addresses. The geography of grief expanded. Syracuse and London and Frankfurt drew lines to Lockerbie, and those lines stayed. In classrooms, students learned aviation and law because the place they lived had taught both at once. On the anniversary, church bells marked the hour. A list of names occupied the town's entire attention. Trees grew back along the crescent. Pavement healed. Absence kept its shape. The long work of blame and proof outlasted the smoke. Evidence moved through courtrooms and capitals. Indictments, sanctions, appeals, words that seemed too pale beside the crater, nonetheless mattered. Some names settled into the record with final weight. Other arguments persisted and still wake with each December. Lockerbie learned to keep living while the sentence of the case ran on over the horizon of a small town. Out of catastrophe came stubborn, ordinary kindness. A pilot in the harbor of grief, steered by small stars, open the door, lend a coat, write a letter for someone who could not yet hold a pen. A farmer walked his fields at dusk and gathered paper, then sat down because one page was a homework assignment that used the same blue ink his own daughter used. He folded it, carried it to the church, and wept where no one could see. In the hangar, the 747 returned as a lesson. Panels riddled with black pitting traced back to a point the size of a book. Engineers taught each other the failure that runs faster than thought. How pressure tears, how frames unzip, how skin becomes confetti. They wrote those lessons into manuals and training so a crew far away, years later, would know what a warning light means and what not to ignore on a winter day. Locked in the story are moments that still catch breath, a phone that rings in a kitchen and does not stop, a child who keeps asking when, the way snow starts after midnight, late and gentle, as if the sky were ashamed. In New York, a family sets one plate less and does it carefully, a small ritual that insists on dignity. In Lockerbie, a gardener kneels to pull weeds and pauses, sensing the history in the soil under his hand. Stand at Sherwood Crescent now, neat hedges, new roofs, a memorial where names are carved as if into water that will never dry. Nothing in the shallow sun announces what happened, and yet people step slightly aside at a certain corner, the way one gives way to a memory that still needs room. The town is not a museum piece. It is a place that goes on, carrying more than seemed possible, and distributing the weight by living. A disaster is made of indifferent forces. The work after is made of meaning. Investigators honor bolts and scorch marks as if they could testify. Towns honor names, so randomness does not get the last word. Families honor time by counting it, years since, candles lit, and by building lives in which the counting is not the only arithmetic. Out of a winter night came wreckage and flame. Out of a small town came witness and care. On that night, strangers' stories braided forever. A road in Scotland became a bookmark in lives that began across the world. The line Flight 103 meant to draw across the planet bent downward instead, and that bend became the geography of Lockerbie. From it came a promise. To remember, to keep asking why and how, to teach the next controller, the next baggage handler, the next officer at a gate what vigilance looks like. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.